I remember the sound before anything happened. Silence. I was seated 3 rows from the front in courtroom 3B at the county courthouse. It was a typical Thursday, no packed benches, no press cameras, just a few attorneys, a tired judge, and the usual quiet shuffle of civil procedure. Then she walked in. A black woman, mid-30s maybe, wearing a crisp gray suit and her hair in neat, pinned curls. No entourage. No dramatics. Just a calm, composed presence that made you sit straighter without knowing why. She didn't say a word as she moved toward the front row and sat down. A few people whispered. One bailiff tilted his head, clearly recognizing her. The other officer, a younger one, was already fidgeting, like he didn't want her there. The judge hadn't even entered yet when the younger cop approached her. "You can't sit there," he said, not loud, but sharp. She looked up slowly and replied in a tone so steady it cut through the room, "I have permission." "You can check." She handed over a folded slip of paper, but he didn't even read it. That's when everything shifted. He snatched the paper from her hand, then grabbed her wrist. "Stand up," he barked. She didn't resist. She didn't flinch. She simply said, "You're making a mistake." The older bailiff stepped forward, trying to de-escalate, but it was too late. The young cop yanked her up so hard the bench behind her screeched. Her body tilted back slightly, but she stayed balanced. Still calm. Still controlled. That's when it happened. He struck her. Right there in front of everyone. A backhand across her cheek, not enough to knock her down, but enough to echo. The room gasped. The older bailiff froze mid-step. She stood still. Silent. But then, she reached into her blazer. Not a weapon. Not a phone. A badge. Not a courtroom visitor. Not a defendant. She was internal affairs. And that's when the gallery went cold. The gold glint of that badge might as well have been a gunshot. The courtroom fell into an unnatural stillness, the kind that comes right before something irreversible. The young officer who had struck her stopped breathing for a moment. His hand, still gripping her wrist, began to tremble. She didn't say a word. She simply held the badge higher so everyone could see. Agent Simone Graves. Federal Oversight. Her voice was composed, unwavering, measured like someone who had trained for exactly this moment. "Let go of me," she added, calmly. The older bailiff moved first. "Let her go, Dan," he said, his voice low, urgent. "Let go. Now." Dan, the younger cop, released her hand like it was fire. He stepped back, his face drained of color. But it was too late to undo what he'd done. Half the courtroom had seen it. And Simone, she didn't look hurt. She looked ready. She turned slowly toward the judge's clerk, who had just stood up, clearly rattled. "Is Judge Keller in chambers?" The clerk nodded quickly. "Why, yes. I'll get him." "Do that," Simone said, returning the badge to her jacket pocket with surgical precision. "And inform him this hearing is suspended pending a federal inquiry." Gasps. From the gallery. From the attorneys. Even from the stenographer, who instinctively stood with wide eyes, her fingers still hovering over the keys. Simone stepped away from the bench, giving the entire room a view of the faint red mark on her cheek. "I need that recorded in evidence," she said to no one in particular. "Every inch of this courtroom has surveillance. I want a copy pulled immediately." The silence was then broken, not by shouting, not by excuses, but by the quiet creak of the judge's door opening. Judge Keller stepped out. And the moment he saw Simone standing in the center of the courtroom, badge out, the young officer 2 steps behind her with his head down. He understood. And his expression turned to dread. Judge Keller froze mid-step. His eyes swept the room and landed on Simone Graves. The slight red mark on her face, the federal badge now clipped to her lapel, and the posture of the officer behind her told him everything he needed to know, without a single word exchanged. He cleared his throat, trying to steady his voice. "Ms. Graves. I wasn't informed you would be present today." Her eyes met his, cool, deliberate. "I'm not here in an official court capacity, Your Honor. I came to observe." "Observe what?" he asked, though it was clear he regretted the question the second it left his mouth. Simone took one quiet step forward. "Ongoing behavioral patterns. Escalation. Inappropriate use of force. I didn't plan to intervene. But your officer made that decision for me." She gestured lightly toward Officer Dan, who was still standing stiff, sweat collecting at his temples. "Agent Graves," Keller said, his voice now gentler, more careful, "this is a misunderstanding. Surely we can debrief in chambers and—" "No," she said flatly. Her tone sliced through his sentence like a blade. "This isn't a private conversation anymore. This happened in a public courtroom, in front of witnesses and court staff. And this isn't the first time a report has crossed my desk involving this officer, or your courtroom." A few people shifted in their seats. One lawyer turned and whispered something to his client. The air was thick now. Everyone could feel it. Judge Keller glanced at the gallery. He could see the panic setting in, his control was slipping. Simone removed a folded document from her inner pocket and handed it to the older bailiff. "This is a formal notice from the Office of Federal Judicial Oversight. As of now, this courtroom is under temporary review. Officer Dan is to be relieved of duty immediately. All active cases on today's docket are postponed. You can't just walk in here and—" Keller started. "I didn't walk in, Judge," she said sharply. "I've been watching." And then, she turned to the gallery. "And if any of you witnessed what happened just now, I encourage you to make a statement before you leave this building." Dozens of eyes were locked on her. And slowly, one by one, people started standing. Witnesses. The silence of earlier was gone. Now, the gallery was rising. Part 4, next. Part 4 ChatGPT, Part 4, the gallery rises. One woman in the back stood up first, a retired teacher by the look of her, hands steady, eyes firm. Then a young man in a public defender's suit followed. A mother clutching her purse to her chest. A law student with a notepad still in hand. Within seconds, nearly half the courtroom was on their feet. Judge Keller's jaw tightened. "This is highly irregular," he muttered. Simone turned toward him with the kind of look that erased titles. "What's irregular, Your Honor, is an officer striking an unarmed woman in your courtroom and you treating it like an inconvenience." Officer Dan stepped backward as if the very floor beneath him had changed temperature. Simone continued, raising her voice just enough, "If you're all willing to submit statements, the clerk will direct you to a holding room. Please keep your phones off and remain available. Your testimony is critical." The clerk, nervous and pale, nodded quickly and gestured to the door leading to the conference room. People began filing out in silence, like witnesses to something sacred. Something historic. Simone didn't move. She watched. Then she turned to Officer Dan. "You assaulted a federal agent, officer. That's not just career-ending, it's criminal." He stammered. I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," she snapped. "You didn't care who I was. You saw someone you thought you could control." That landed like thunder. Judge Keller adjusted his robe, searching for some angle of power he could still claim. "Agent Graves, with respect, this matter could have been resolved with internal communication. There's no need to involve the press." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I care about headlines?" She stepped closer to the bench. "I care about precedent. Because next time, it won't be me. It'll be a young girl in this courtroom for the first time, watching what happens when someone in power loses control. I'm here to make sure there's no next time." Behind her, the courtroom doors opened again, this time not from the gallery. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped inside. They walked straight toward Officer Dan. Part 5, next. Part 5 ChatGPT, Part 5, the handcuffs clicked the moment the U.S. Marshals entered, the tension in the room snapped tight like a wire. Their presence was silent, but commanding, 2 men in dark suits, no need for introductions. Everyone knew why they were there. Officer Dan instinctively raised his hand slightly, his voice trembling. "Wait, hold on, this is all being blown out of, turn around," one marshal said firmly. Dan looked to Judge Keller for help, but the judge avoided his eyes. "Now, officer." Dan turned slowly, breathing hard. The older bailiff stepped aside, jaw clenched, ashamed. The younger officer barely got a word out before the first cuff clicked around his wrist. The sound echoed in the quiet courtroom like a gavel striking steel. "Officer Daniel Parks, you are being taken into federal custody for assault on a federal agent and obstruction of justice during an official investigation," the lead marshal said in a calm, rehearsed tone. Dan was visibly shaking. "I didn't know. I didn't know," he kept repeating. But no one answered him. The marshals began to escort him out through the side doors, past the stunned gallery, past the camera mounted above the judge's bench, still blinking red. As the door closed behind them, Judge Keller rubbed a hand down his face. "Agent Graves, I don't know what you're trying to prove with this display, I'm not here to prove anything," she said, her voice low but sharp. "I'm here to expose a pattern that's been allowed to rot this courtroom from the inside out." She paused, then added with finality, "You can expect a full audit, Judge. Your conduct on the bench is now under direct federal review." Keller stood there, jaw locked, no retort ready. For once, the gavel wasn't in his hand. Simone nodded to the bailiff who had tried to help earlier. "Thank you for stepping in. You did the right thing." He gave a small nod in return, eyes lowered in respect. And then Agent Simone Graves walked toward the rear doors of the courtroom, her stride steady, the red mark on her cheek still visible, but her presence now 10 times louder. Everyone turned as she passed. Not because she caused a scene, but because she ended one. Part 6, Final. Part 6 ChatGPT, Part 6, the silence after Justice Simone Graves exited the courtroom without looking back. The hallway outside was quiet, sterile, lined with government posters and buzzing fluorescent lights. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel suffocating. It felt earned. She walked with purpose down the corridor, past a few courthouse staff who stepped aside instinctively. They had heard. The building's heartbeat had changed. Inside the conference room, witnesses were already beginning to give statements. The retired teacher. The public defender. Even a clerk who had worked in the courthouse for over a decade, each one ready to speak, to write, to help rewrite what justice looked like in that courtroom. Simone paused just outside, watching through the glass for a moment. People once silent were now standing up, some visibly shaken, others burning with quiet resolve. The change was real. Not just paperwork. Not just headlines. It had weight. A voice interrupted her thoughts. "Agent Graves." She turned. One of the marshals who had taken Officer Dan into custody was walking up, handing her a folder. "Preliminary charges confirmed. Body cam footage pulled. Surveillance backup is underway. We'll process the complaint through the usual channels." "Thank you," she said, taking the folder without hesitation. He lingered for a second. "You know, most people would have filed a report and left it at that." Simone looked him in the eye. "Most people aren't followed by eyes every time they walk into a room." He gave a slow nod and left her alone again. Simone didn't walk out of that courthouse with cameras flashing or applause behind her. She walked out quiet. Calm. And powerful. Because justice doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes, it comes in silence, wearing a badge. END, Part 7 ChatGPT, Part 7, the ripple effect. Though Simone Graves had left the building, what she ignited inside that courtroom didn't stop with her exit. By the next morning, the entire courthouse was under a microscope. Federal investigators arrived in unmarked cars before sunrise. Internal emails were frozen. Security footage was pulled not just from that day, but from the last 6 months. Judge Keller didn't show up for the day's hearings. Neither did 2 other officers who were known for quiet removals and rough handling of certain defendants, details that were always swept under the rug. Not anymore. Local news stations picked up a version of the story, carefully scrubbed, but with enough weight that reporters started asking questions. Why was a federal agent assaulted in open court? Why were courtrooms allowed to function unchecked for so long? Meanwhile, something else was happening. In the witness conference room, a young law student, who had quietly taken notes during the entire incident, sent a lengthy statement to her university's legal review board. Not just about what she saw, but about how it made her feel. About what law should be. What justice must be. It went viral. Simone didn't respond to media requests. She wasn't interested in interviews. But she did respond to a handwritten note slipped under her office door a few days later. It was from the older bailiff. He wrote, "Thank you for not raising your voice. You showed us what real authority looks like." She folded the note and tucked it into her badge case, beside her ID. Not as a trophy. But as a reminder, sometimes, the loudest change begins with one silent refusal to be broken. The True END, Part 8 ChatGPT, Part 8, the call that changed everything. 3 weeks after the courtroom incident, Simone Graves was back in her D.C. office, catching up on cases that had nothing to do with judges or bailiffs, until her phone rang. The caller ID read, DOJ, Deputy Director's line. She straightened up before answering. Graves. Agent Graves, came the voice. Crisp. Older. We've reviewed the full report on the courthouse incident, and we'd like to speak to you in person. Her fingers drummed once on the desk. Is this about disciplinary action? There was a brief pause on the other end, then a soft chuckle. No. Quite the opposite. The next day, she walked into a high-rise building 3 blocks from the Capitol, where she was escorted through a security checkpoint to the 8th floor. Inside, a polished office with floor-to-ceiling windows waited. And so did 3 senior officials. One of them, a woman in a gray blazer who'd once clerked for the Supreme Court, spoke first. You've exposed a systemic breakdown, she said plainly. And you didn't do it through rage or spectacle. You held your ground, followed the law, and let the truth do the talking. Simone said nothing. Just listened. We want you to head up a new task force. National level. Internal accountability across federal courtrooms. Quiet power, like yours, it's rare. And right now, it's what this country needs. Simone blinked once. She wasn't used to being offered power. She was used to confronting it. Still, she nodded slowly. I'll need full independence. Full access. And no interference. The officials exchanged glances. You'll have it. As Simone left the building that day, a journalist on the sidewalk recognized her and tried to approach, but she raised one hand politely and kept walking. Because while everyone else was still talking about the courtroom, Simone was already planning to walk into the next one. True Final, Part 9 ChatGPT, Part 9, the next courtroom 2 months later. Different city. Different courthouse. Simone Graves stepped into a federal courtroom in Atlanta, this time not as a silent observer, but as the lead of the newly formed Judicial Integrity Oversight Task Force. The seal on her new credentials bore the weight of Washington behind it. But she didn't wear it like a weapon. She wore it like armor. The courtroom was packed. Not because of the case, but because of her. Word had spread. The quiet woman with the steel spine. The one who didn't flinch when struck. The one who turned an entire courtroom system upside down with a single badge and the truth. Simone sat in the back row, just as she had the first time. A young man in a public defender's suit recognized her. He gave a respectful nod. She didn't respond. Not out of rudeness, but discipline. She was there to watch, to listen, to measure the space between the law as it's written, and the law as it's practiced. Halfway through the hearing, a judge raised his voice unnecessarily. A bailiff hovered too close to a nervous teenage witness. Simone took a quiet note. By the time the session ended, the courtroom emptied with the usual shuffle, except for the bailiff, who approached her. "You're her, right?" he asked quietly. "From the Keller case." Simone looked up. "I'm not here to be her," she said. "I'm here to make sure what happened there doesn't happen again." The bailiff nodded slowly. Then straightened his posture, just slightly. Because now they all knew, there was someone watching. Not to punish, but to correct. Simone Graves didn't need a podium or headlines. She had a badge. She had a mandate. And she had one courtroom at a time. Legacy Begins, Part 10. Final Chat GPT, Part 10, Legacy in Motion, Final Months Turn to a Year. Simone Graves and her task force quietly swept through courthouses across the country, never with sirens, never with spotlights. Just presence. Precision. Purpose. In city after city, court staff began behaving differently. Judges asked more questions before issuing rulings. Officers thought twice before raising their voices. And defendants, especially those who once felt invisible, began to sense something had shifted. Because it had. The Keller case became required reading at legal academies. Not because of drama, but because of discipline. A case study in control, accountability, and the quiet dismantling of unchecked power. Simone never accepted interviews. Never wrote a memoir. But she did train the next generation of oversight officers, instilling in them not just legal procedure, but the poise needed when law and power collide. One morning, as she prepared to step into yet another courthouse, just another brick building, another docket, another fight, her phone buzzed. A message from the very first clerk who'd stood frozen the day she was struck. "Because of you, I stayed. Because of you, I speak up now. Thank you for showing me how to stand still, and still stand strong." Simone read it, tucked her phone away, and walked inside. Because justice didn't need to roar. It needed to be present. Consistent. And unshakable. Like her.